Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. I'm here to ask and answer one simple question. WTF is Battlestar Galactica Deadlock? It is a turn-based fleet tactics game with a strategy layer brought to you by Black Lab, published by Slytherin, who are known for quite a lot of war games. Black Lab have made a game called Starhammer, which is the basis for this one. Except Starhammer, of course, didn't have a really awesome, interesting IP attached to it, whereas this one obviously does, which makes it a somewhat more attractive prospect. Battlestar Galactica hasn't exactly showered us with gaming goodness over the past few years. There's a pretty terrible mobile game called Battlestar Galactica Squadrons. There was some sort of web-based MMO-like combat game they were trying to build. I don't know if that's even still in play. It may very well have been shut down. And there is a very good mod, if I recall, for Free Space 2. I think it's called Diaspora, which is worth having a look at. But getting an official Battlestar Galactica game, not least a Battlestar Galactica game that tells a canon story, is of interest to many people, myself included, who very much enjoyed the television series. First, we'll dabble in the options menu, and then we'll have a look at what this game has to offer and see whether or not it is worth the price tag. Alright, game options are relatively basic. You've got your sound option sliders right here, along with zoom speed, rotate speed, and pan speed. These are by default a little bit low, so I'd recommend maybe getting these up just a little bit. There we go. Mouse scroll on the edge and invert pitch and zoom as well, since this is a full three-dimensional space game. So those of you complaining about too many space games that are done on a flat plane, those of you perhaps who didn't enjoy Battlefleet Gothic, shame on you, heresy, for that sort of thing, well, don't worry, this game does have the full-on 3D experience and it makes use of it. A couple of options like combat notifications, I'm actually not even sure what they do because they don't have any hover-over tooltips. Always worth adding such a thing when you have something that is not necessarily well described. Graphics options are bare bones, let's just put it that way. If you head to custom, that's the best you can get, and that's really not even a lot. So, the game is not hugely demanding. Obviously, space games generally aren't. They're usually empty space, maybe a few asteroids and some ship models. That's not particularly difficult to deal with. Although I will say that, as you are probably about to see, there's some very nicely detailed ship models and some really cool effects in this game. Now, shortcut keys. Oh god, it would be nicer if these were more accessible, because you can't access these while in the game, only from the main menu, which is a little bit of a sin, as far as I'm concerned. There is already a channel called Gaming Sins, otherwise I'd do it, and frankly, I'd do it better, but never mind. We'll look at the camera controls. WASD is used and is useful, so keep that in mind. Zoom in and out is best done with the mouse wheel as opposed to this. And there are a couple of hotkeys that are quite useful, such as squadron launch and missile launch. This is because the game inexplicably does not allow you to select more than one ship at a time, so learning a few of these hotkeys will speed up your experience and make it a little bit less frustrating. There is one key that I would like to point out to people that is not even mentioned in the game and is very, very, very useful. That key is \, toggle weapon arc visibility. Now, once you learn the ships, you don't really need to know the weapon arcs, but initially it will be bloody handy to have this, and for some reason it's not on by default. I can't imagine why, and it doesn't have a button on the UI, so it is hidden away here, \. Bear that in mind. Now, the game offers you a campaign, a fairly lengthy one at that has both a story-driven narrative, accompanied by cutscenes and scripted missions, as well as a bunch of side missions which are generally done to keep the colonies happy and earn you a little bit extra money. Those missions don't have a huge amount of variety in them. They usually just blow up the enemy fleet, but they usually have a couple of little twists like, oh, there is a station that also needs to be blown up, or there is a freighter that you have to escort, and all that kind of thing. Also have skirmish and multiplayer modes. The skirmish mode is really quite nice. We can have a little bit of a gander at that if you like, and show you what is available. This is the mode that lets you play Cylons if you want. The campaign is Colonial Fleet only. Pick the number of fleet points you want. Pick from a very small selection of maps, which is somewhat disappointing, as you can see. For some reason, the load time on those maps is a little excessive as well, just to load in the background. And then you've got some default fleets, and then you can mess around with them as you wish. If you want to deploy a Cylon fleet, you're able to do that. This is what you're up against. You can do colonial versus colonial if you like as well. And you do have some customization options here. So let's say I wanted to modify the colonial adamant fleet here, which is a bunch of adamant frigates and corvettes. I could add a ship to it, and these are the ships available. There aren't all that many of them, but they do have a degree of customization. You can change what they're loaded out with, such as different kinds of missiles and torpedoes, different kinds of fighters, and support craft and all that kind of thing. So, yes, it is a limited number of capital ships. That is clear, but there is also no role overlap, which is quite nice. So you're going to be using ships for a specific reason. And of course, if you want a Battlestar, the biggest one on offer is the Jupiter, and there is the lighter Battlestar, which is still pretty large, the Artemis. Now, bear in mind, this is based in the first Cylon War, so a lot of the more advanced tech that you saw in the series isn't here. But the Jupiter is the largest and most advanced Battlestar that you can deploy. And as you can see, you have some customization here as well. You are able to select different kinds of fighters, escort ships, and there are also a couple of different, I say a couple, you have full-on nuclear warheads if you want, available here for loadout. So there's definitely some customization there. There's enough, like it's sufficient. If you want to mess around with the Cylons, you can kind of do the same thing, and they have these sort of things available. We'd have to remove a ship if we actually wanted to do anything here to add one, but you could see carriers, gunships, Nemesis corvettes, which are electronic warfare ships, and the old style of base stars, as you can see right here. And you can also customize those as well. And they have some different weapons and fighters available, stuff that the Colonials do not have. So there is a bit of variety there. They also have a couple of different mechanics each. For instance, the Cylons are able to hack, and they're also able to overclock parts of their ships to make them a little bit more effective. So skirmishing is a good way to sink a few hours in and have some fantasy battles. Nothing wrong with that, and the multiplayer lets you do basically the same thing. The multiplayer player base is understandably quite small for a title that is relatively niche, but it is there if you want it. Now, the campaign is the main meat. This is where your money is going to be spent. And I'm going to dive right in and show you exactly what's going on with it. So the campaign has this map right here, and it is a strategy layer on top of the turn-based tactics. You have control of various fleets. At the moment, I'm just running this one fleet, and this fleet is accompanied by a mobile shipyard, the Daedalus. Or Daedalus, I don't know. It's not spelt the same as Daedalus, but it's a mobile shipyard. It's where you build your ships. Don't get it blown up. And if you use that, you are able to engage in missions. You can only use the main fleet for the main story missions. Side missions, they can be done through the use of a side fleet, and they can be commanded by officers and things like that. So you'll see here, you have the 12 colonies involved in this quorum thing, and there's a bit of disagreement between these colonies about this whole colonial fleet thing that they're trying to put together. Not everybody agrees that there should be one, and there is certainly some conflict and quite a bit of politics involved in the story, which is good, because frankly, Battlestar Galactica was a very political show, and cutting that out would somewhat neuter the feeling, I feel. So conflict and disagreement between these colonies, as well as the Cylons themselves, adds an extra dimension to the war, which otherwise would be a fairly dull and droll affair, I think. So keeping these guys happy is pretty important. Defending their worlds, also very important. You'll notice here that these are side missions. Now, these are harassment fleets. You have, in this case, 5 turns to get there. If you don't, then they're going to do something to this planet, and you're going to start to lose support. And sort of in an XCOM kind of way, although fairly light in terms of how they address that. You're trying to keep all these people happy, so they keep paying you so that you can support your fleet and build more of them. When it comes to building ships, this is what I can currently build. I don't have access to everything because I haven't researched everything yet, but I just gained the ability to build a light Battlestar, so I can build the Artemis. I can show you that in action. Didn't really want to demonstrate the Battlestar Galactica game without showing you a Battlestar. Ranger Cruiser is available. That's a very effective missile cruiser. Adamant frigates, which are basically gunships and light carriers. And the Manticore Corvette, which is a nice point defense ship with a missile launcher. Can also be used as a torpedo boat, and it's extremely maneuverable. The nice thing about this is that every ship seems to have a use. There is very little role overlap, so while you may be disappointed that there are only these number of ships kind of available, every one of them has a purpose, and that is in itself a good thing. These are things that I can research for requisition points. Requisition points are spent either on requisitioning new blueprints and technology. So these guys, or if I wanted to get armor piercing or electronic warfare missiles, I could do that. And eventually, of course, get access to the Jupiter Heavy Battlestar and all that kind of thing. But I have to spend the requisition points. They're also spent on recruiting officers. Officers command fleets, and they will give a wide variety of bonuses, and officers can level up. Now, this does something to address one of my complaints about the game, sort of a missed opportunity. It's not like an objectively bad thing, but I feel that ships in this game are quite disposable, maybe more than they should be. It would be nice if the crews gained experience. As it stands, they have an officer system that sort of replaces that, and the officer that commands the fleet gains experience, and of course if the fleet and their flagship gets destroyed, then the officer is killed. So there is an element of permadeath there. When you lose a ship, of course, you have to rebuild it. I would just like them to expand that a little bit more and maybe take the aspect of damage into account. Everything is magically repaired as long as it survives a battle. Would be nice if maybe ships had to be brought back in for repairs or could be sent out damaged, all that kind of thing. That's not in the game. That's sort of an element to the simulation and the strategy layer that I think would add a lot more depth to it. Outside of that, you can look at your economy. And it's going to tell you who's happy, who is not, who's going to be making you money, who is not. You know, these guys, not too happy with me, and we'd like maybe to earn a little bit more, and we could do that by making sure that we reinforce their world and clear everything out. There are some other aspects to this that are not well explained in the tutorial. For instance, the idea that if the Daedalus shipyard is docked in a specific place, it will actually gain bonuses. So if there is a place that you really would like to produce a lot, if you put a fleet there, it counts as being fortified. That means it produces more, and you gain political bonuses, production bonuses. Basically, every single one of these worlds has a different bonus to offer. So that's something that the tutorial didn't bother to teach me, and I only learned it from seeing a tooltip. You also have this news feed down the bottom here. Just going to tell you about the battles you've engaged in and what's going on, and also the ongoing story is tracked this way as well. So that's basically how this works. The only other thing to show you really is moving around. Now, this costs Tillium to move, so if you can't afford to do that, you might want to chill out, because this is basically a faster jump, and if you hang around and wait for a couple of turns, you can get a much cheaper jump, and you can also earn more resources. But the more turns you waste, the worse it's going to get. It's going to take me a while to get over there. It could be very costly to do it. I'd have to jump from several systems to reach these points, but I'll do it because I'd like to show you how it works. So I'm going to spend a bunch of Tillium to basically do this sort of kind of emergency jump, and you follow star lanes to get there. So this is in range, this is out of range, so if I jump here and then end the turn, that'll show you what's going on. But by using that turn, of course, these are going to go down, at least after I fight, because it looks like I've run right into a Cylon escort group. So let's fight and show you the meat of the game, which is to be found in this tactics layer. Now, I mentioned this is turn-based. Now, this is turn-based in a very specific kind of way. This has been done in a couple of games, including the studio's previous game, Starhammer. And the idea is that you plan your moves out, and then when you execute them, it does like 10 seconds real time, and then it stops, and then you move again. This has been done in a few different games, like, say, Frozen Synapse is probably a good example, and you don't know exactly where the opponent is going to move, so you have to anticipate that. I'm going to move my shipyard back a bit, because it's not very good in combat, and if it blows up, we lose the game. That's not great. I'm deploying my Artemis Light Battlestar alongside an escort of 2 Adamant frigates. These are very good, just line craft. You get a good broadside going with this thing, and they're very effective. And we're carrying a bunch of Viper Mark IIs, which are my latest fighter craft. I'm also going to load up with torpedoes. I do love my torpedoes. I think if you've got a space game without torpedoes, it's not a space game, frankly. You can have guided missiles, a bunch of other stuff, but guided missiles are for wimps who want torpedoes. Unguided torpedoes, yes. You can tell I kind of fetishized this a little bit too much, yes. I had a fun childhood when it came to spaceships and fantasizing about spaceships and making spaceships out of cardboard boxes, and yeah, you know, we're not going to go into that. Now, when you engage with the Daedalus in play, you don't have to pay supply costs for refitting your ships with advanced munitions, which is kind of handy. That means you can always use the best stuff. If you're using a secondary fleet, you are going to have to pay for things like Viper Mark IIs and different missiles, so your other fleets, maybe you just don't want to do that. All right, let's jump in.
Prepare to jump in
Here we go.
3, 2, 1.
And what you're going to notice is that there's quite the commitment to visual theme in this game. And there's some really cool stuff I want to show you once this battle is over. There's an incredible replay mode. Anyway, I'll show you how this works. So, this is not as complicated as it looks, but the UI is a bit clunky, which makes it maybe more complicated than it has a right to be. So, this is the planning phase, and I'm going to be deploying my ships in a very specific kind of way. And the first thing you want to do is tell it where to go. And if I want to make a turning curve, if I want a curve, I want to turn, then depends on the ship as to how maneuverable it is. Frigates are relatively maneuverable. I'm going to go straight ahead, I'm going to click once, and then I can choose height. This is quite important. And then I can yaw the ship as well. Now, if you yaw the ship, this allows you to pull off some pretty extreme turns, but it will affect your accuracy. So, generally speaking, when you're trying to get into a firing line, you want to avoid that. Yawing, however, is a great way to dodge incoming torpedo fire and also just a lot of gunfire. You can literally engage in evasive maneuvers, which is pretty cool and not something that a lot of these games let you do. The Battlestar, needless to say, is not quite as maneuverable, and let's not crash it into the other ship, because if you do, they will explode, as I discovered on the stream to my cost. Oh, Manticores. I am very sorry to the families of those responsible. Okay, we're going to go high with the Battlestar, and these are all kind of broadside sort of ships, so we do want to aim for a broadside. Now what we want to do is launch Vipers. Now remember that hotkey I mentioned earlier? This is where you want to use it, because launching Vipers otherwise is a pain in the arse. So we're going to launch Vipers from everything. We're going to launch everything we've got. There's really no reason not to, honestly. Keeping your Vipers in the bay is really only a good thing if, say, you're engaging against ships that have a lot of flak capabilities. So maybe you want to protect your Vipers in the bays until the flak ships are dealt with, but I very much doubt we're going against that. These are probably basic Cylon ships, and here's hoping that I was right on this. This is the first time our Artemis has had a chance to fight, so I'm looking forward to this. Okay, that's basically about it when it comes to movement. There's a couple of other things you can mess with, but I'm going to show you those when they're relevant. Here we go. Once you hit end turn, the ships will move. And let's not crash them into each other. Vipers are being launched from the bays and are ready to rock and roll. We have 6 wings of Mark II Vipers. They will probably tear through what the Cylons have here. They're extremely effective at what they do. And we're going to make sure that they do that. Now, this is where my criticisms of the UI start to kick into play, because especially when dealing with large squadrons of Vipers, you would really like to select them all and maybe send them at the enemy. You can't do that. You have to select them individually, and you can hit the T key and then select a target. You can either scroll between them using this, or you can click. This is fiddly as hell. It would be really nice if you're able to assign them to control groups. You can't do that. Now, I can sort of understand it with the big capital ships, because they do limit you to a total of 7 capital ships in your fleet. So really, you don't need to control large groups, but come on. Being able to group these together would make this a hell of a lot less fiddly, especially when dealing with huge numbers of fighters. Bit of a pain in the arse. Alright, we're going to move our ships forward, and here's what I'm going to demonstrate another part of the overall ship management system. You can power different systems. So I'm going to boost my thrusters, because I want to get these guys to really get into a firing line and prepare, because we're going to unleash broadsides as soon as the Cylons are in range. The best way I can do that is to boost to make sure that my ships are getting out ahead of the Battlestar. The Battlestar is going to slowly start to turn and set up to provide a defensive flak screen for the inevitable ordnance that's going to be coming our way. All our Vipers have been sent in. Looks like there's a couple of squadrons of Raiders we have to deal with there, and all that good stuff. Now, once you get into combat, you can mess with the power and go to various degrees of offensive or defensive posture, which is going to affect the effectiveness of different systems in the ship. That level of tweaking is something that I very much enjoy, and the kind of thing that should be in a tactics game that very much says we are a simulation to some extent. There are a few too many games, in my honest opinion, that do not provide that ability, and I think they're weaker for it. There we go. We're setting up our firing line. We want to turn the boost thrusters off, because, of course, going full thrust means we are losing maneuverability. And we're going to set up our British Naval-style firing line. Hell, the tactics were done for a bloody good reason. And we're going to prepare to fight. In the meantime, I'm going to retask 2 of these Viper squadrons to intercept these raiders and destroy them. Which is a little fiddly. A little fiddlier than it really has any right to be. We know what they are because the Raiders contact says they're small. We don't know what kind of raiders they are, but they're definitely fighter class. So we're going to select this squadron as well, and they'll engage those. Generally, Viper Mark IIs decimate raider squadrons, so we should be just fine. Once these guys are in range, we can open up with everything we've got. And in fact, I'm going to crank the Artemis all the way up to maximum attack posture. It's going to slow me down, but if I hit spacebar and check my subsystems, you're going to... well, you would if I could actually show you them, which it turns out I can't. Those are its turrets. There's where I can fire. Just, you're going to have to trust me on this. This cranks up the ability of my offensive systems to work well, but decreases some of my defensive capabilities, right? That's how it works. All right, let's engage. Our ships are on the way, and we got incoming. We're not kidding about incoming either. A volley of torpedoes heading in the direction of our Battlestar. We really could have used the flak screen up there, which we did not use. But we took some hits. The Battlestar's pretty tough. It can take some hits like that, and this is what we're up against. Quite a lot. So, let's move into firing positions. I'm going to increase the height of the ship, and then we're going to crank it all the way up to maximum firepower, and then maybe... no, you're not going in that direction. I don't know why you thought you were. There we go. Disobedient little bastard. And crank that attack up and then open fire. The Vipers have engaged. You can, if you zoom right in, you can see where they are. They're right over here. And they should be scrapping those raiders pretty quickly. And they're already doing some pretty significant damage. Now, let me show you something cool. Battlestars have flak screens. And this is how they work. You can put up a flak screen, and you can use it to destroy incoming missiles and fighters. So, if they get anywhere near me, flak is going to easily destroy incoming ordnance. Now, what you can also do is, of course, have the Battlestar in front of your other ships, and that is a great way to deflect incoming fire. And we're going to maneuver our adamants so that they get behind the Battlestar's flak screen, just in case we have any more missiles coming our way. Speaking of missiles, let's launch some of our own. Torpedoes, in this case. I'm going to aim them at the slower ships, because they're unguided. So we're going to aim directly at the Revenant. I'm hoping that they fire before the flak screen enables, otherwise I will shoot down my own torpedoes, which would be kind of embarrassing, but it would demonstrate how effective flak is. Aiming them at small ships, generally not a good idea, because they don't hit. Guided missiles are much better against smaller, more maneuverable ships. Alright, and open fire with everything we've got. And we killed all of our own torpedoes with a flak screen. Guess that shows how that mechanic works, right? We have to be a little bit careful with flak screens. If my fighters get too close, they will also get blown up by it, which is not what you want. There's some cool stuff. The Cylons are able to hack ships and disable their subsystems. So these electronic warfare ships are able to do significant damage. So we might want to focus them down. You can see the firewalls there. They're already falling. And on full offensive mode, these ships don't do a particularly great job of handling that. We'll have the Battlestar focus fire on the Revenant. I want to take that out and get one of their big ships out of the way, and then we're going to blow up their corvettes. We can retask some of our Vipers, which it turns out are already going after the Nemesis ships, to attack. Because Vipers are pretty good at taking out these small little corvettes. They're not very strong. So we can just retarget. There we go. You can sort of see how this is going and how it works. Let's end the turn and try not to get blown up. One of the Nemesis just went up in smoke. And we get to see a lovely, lovely mess. Mmm, delicious. Some pretty serious damage going on. We could probably turn off the Battlestar's flak screen, although I'm waiting for them to launch more missiles. I think they've decided not to, probably as a direct result of my flak screen being up. What I want to try and do is maneuver the adamants behind the ship and just kind of checking the armor damage. Looks like not a lot has been done, and as long as we can take out that Nemesis, then we should be in a pretty good position. So I will focus fire there. That Revenant looks like it's getting beaten on pretty badly, and we might retask the Battlestar to focus fire on this Talon. There we go. And engage. What you might notice is when you get into a fight, the music gets really cool. I'm going to let you listen to the music during the replay, because that's a great way to experience it. It's by a composer called Ash Gibson Grieg out of Australia. Not a very well-known guy, but he has done an incredible job of emulating the music and feel of Battlestar, which is one of the big strengths of this game. It really does, despite its clunky UI, and good lord does it have one, as I have mentioned. You know, backslash, where the bloody hell is backslash these days? Want to show weapon arcs? This stuff should be on by default. There you can see the weapon arcs. Battlestars also have forward-firing guns, so we might even want to use that. They're relatively effective at that. They could basically fire in all directions, and I'm going to demonstrate that by turning the Battlestar to turn my flak screen off, and then if I get right next to them, I can attack multiple targets. Which is the strength of these kind of things. Adamant's doing fine, but we really could do with a dead nemesis. Looks like that Viper Squadron is about to provide just that. We'll maneuver into position, and then fire.
Commander.
Despite this clunky UI, that is not massively thematic, I think they could have probably done a little bit better than that. I think these sort of basic wireframes are quite good. They very much emulate the more analog style of Battlestar. The best thing about it is the sound design, the music, the overall theme, and of course the use of politics in the story to really evoke the feeling of the Battlestar Galactica show. And that is the massive difference between Starhammer, their previous game, and this one. Starhammer didn't have this theme going for it, and this theme is what makes it so very much compelling. Far more compelling than the previous game was. Do not underestimate the concept of theme. I've talked about this concept a lot in board gaming as well. You can take a game that is otherwise uninteresting, apply a really cool theme, and suddenly that game becomes a hell of a lot more interesting. That applies to video games as well. And in this case, we have a fine example of that. I'm thinking about putting my flak screen on, but all of my fighters are way too close. So you know what, we won't do that, but we'll maneuver the Adamant behind the Battlestar. In fact, we could maneuver the Adamants in such a way they go above the Battlestar, making use of that 3D space and even making sure that we take shots on our armor on the bottom of the ship as opposed to the side. And we can obliterate what is left of the toasters here. And I'm going to zoom in nice and close so you can hear. In fact, you know what? The replay will be the best way to do that, but I'll zoom in nice and close anyway. You can see what's going on. Look at the detail. There's a lot of it. All of the turrets are individually modeled. The sheer amount of gun batteries going off right here. These are guys that clearly watched the show and wanted to evoke that feeling of the show, and they're getting it. They're very much getting it. So as a fleet tactics game, this is very competent. It's basically about maneuvering ships in 3D space. Nothing too complicated about that concept, but what it does very, very well. You want to see some torpedoes? Of course you do. Who doesn't love a good torpedoing? I'm hoping these torpedoes go over the Battlestar, not into the Battlestar. They very well could go into the Battlestar. Let's hopefully not do that. It can happen. Bring them around. Raise them up. Broadsides with everything we have. Oh, it's glorious is what it is. Glorious. Ripping that thing to shreds. Some nice explosion animations in this as well. Can't have a good fleet tactics game without some good explosions. Alright. Are you ready for me to show you the best part of this game? The part of the game that has solidified in my mind that these guys get what Battlestar Galactica is. Alright. It's this replay. I'm not going to talk. All I'm going to say is that the replay provides a full real-time recap of the battle using a AI camera director and Battlestar Galactica style shaky cam with some awesome music. I'm going to shut up and let you experience that whole thing. Let's watch this battle in full, glorious, cinematic Battlestar Galactica vision. That's porn, is what this video is going to get demonetized for straight up pornography. That's what that is. And that one feature is what convinced me beyond a shadow of a doubt that these guys are really very much fans of the show. The shaky cam, the use of the view slightly behind the Viper's nose, showing dogfights, showing strafing runs, and with this awesome soundtrack in the background, drums and pipes and Celtic influence, oh my, all the kind of thing that you would expect from Battlestar Galactica. I could watch that forever. It's excellent. It really is. That's basically what the game is. Perfect, absolutely not. As I said, the UI is a mess. Learning those hotkeys in the battle is pretty important to avoiding as much frustration as possible, and even then, there is some way too much clunk, frankly. To the point where you might even just not want to tell your Vipers to do anything and just let them act on their own, which is not necessarily the best idea. This particular layer here is serviceable. I would just like to see more of it. And there are a couple of issues with it as well. For instance, you don't really know what you're walking into if you use your main fleet. This is a weird eccentricity of the game. If you have a second fleet, which you can totally make. Let's say I rushed out another Artemis Battlestar, right? Because it's almost finished, so let's just rush it out, spend some Tillium, get it out there. And this Battlestar could form its own fleet. And it could have its own officer, if I had the points for it. I actually do have an unassigned officer. I could assign it to the Artemis Battlestar. There we go. And that would become this guy's flagship. And he would be able to do all sorts of things. Like, I haven't seen this in use yet, but apparently you can use marine boarding parties and all sorts of things like that later in the game. And you can see with these command skills, you're able to field a much larger fleet. This guy can't field very much. Basically, fielding this Battlestar alone has basically maxed out this guy's ability to command a fleet. But through experience, he'll probably do pretty well. And honestly, a Battlestar on its own could deal quite nicely with a basic raiding fleet. But here's the strange thing about this. I'm gonna jump the fleet. I'm gonna jump them there, and then I think I can get them over there. For some reason, I don't quite understand why this is, if you use a secondary fleet, it will tell you the size of force you're up against and give you the option to flee. If you commit your main fleet with the Daedalus carrier thing in it, you can't retreat, and you actually have no idea what you're committing to. Like, I don't know how large a force this is. I don't have a clue. It doesn't tell me. I know there is a Silent Fleet 25 over here. I know that is a 2,000 point fleet. These, I don't know how strong these are. I don't have a clue. So it would be nice if the game maybe had, you know, a little more common sense applied, I guess. That would be pretty cool. Might want to, if I actually go and garrison here, I'll actually be able to reduce shipbuilding costs. That's not a bad idea. There we go. Spool the jump drive and end the turn. So that's a bit of an odd omission. And as I said, I think the strategy layer could have more to it. I think the option to maybe build static fortifications on some of these worlds to maybe delay the Cylons. Perhaps there would, as I said, be an element of fleet damage that's persistent that had to be repaired and all that sort of thing. But it serves its purpose well. It does, frankly, what it should do pretty damn well. I'm hoping maybe that they provide an expansion or some DLC that would maybe flesh this out a little bit more. Because I think there's a lot of room to flesh this game out more than it currently is. You could do quite a lot with it, I think. But as it stands, it is a pretty good game that is going to give you a lot of tactical fleet action. Some of it's a bit easy. There's quite a few walkovers. If you use your secondary fleet, you do have an auto-resolve option, as I'm about to show you. So you can do that, but there's no auto-resolve with the main fleet, one presumes, because if you had auto-resolve with that and then you lost the carrier, it's game over. So that would kind of make things a little awkward, I suppose. I'm just going to save this for a second. I don't want to jump this out because I want to show you the secondary fleet and what that does first. So I'm deliberately letting this happen, which is obviously not what I want. But if I engage... Well, usually I do. Apparently it didn't let me this time. Perhaps it's just against the marauding fleets rather than these ones. If I deploy this single Battlestar, usually I would gain the option to retreat it if I were in a bad position. So there's a few weird inconsistencies here and there, and I think the lack of tooltips and the lack of explanation of some of the strategy layer mechanics has probably got quite a lot to do with the problems that it has. Outside of that, though, I really enjoy it. I think it's a great fleet tactics game. It's got excellent theme, a lot of graphical detail, excellent choice of music. Just generally very, very good in a lot of different ways. The price tag? For a Battlestar Galactica fan, for someone that is an enthusiast for the show, it's not a particularly high price tag. I think offering full skirmish, multiplayer, and a lengthy story campaign for $40 is justifiable. For someone that's not into it, it might be a bit of a harder sell, but bear in mind, Slither and stuff and a lot of these war games, frankly, they are very much niche games, and as a result, their price tags do tend to reflect that.
On it, Commander.
I think this is certainly one of their much easier games to understand, especially if you have played Starhammer. But I can see some people balking at the price a little bit and wanting to wait. Personally, though, if you're into fleet tactics, if you're into space warfare, capital ship warfare, and certainly if you like Battlestar Galactica, there is, in my opinion, no question that this is worth a look. Battlestar Galactica Deadlock, ladies and gentlemen, available for $40 or your regional equivalent on Steam. My name has been TotalBiscuit. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, by all means, do feel free to click the like button. If you're a fracking toaster, the dislike button is right over there. So say we all. We'll see you next time.